Nobody in the waiting room moved when the door banged open and the soldier walked in. He was tall, built the way military men get built when the job stops being a job and starts being what they are. He wore a plain green jacket with a Fort Bragg insignia half covered by a duffel strap, and he held a leash in both hands the way you hold a fire hose, not tight but ready. The Belgian Malinois at the end of that leash was scanning the room before they'd made it 3 steps inside. "Back up," the soldier said to the room, not yelled, just said, like he was accustomed to being heard without raising his voice. "He's a working dog. Don't make eye contact, don't reach out, don't talk to him. We'll be in and out." 3 people in the waiting room immediately looked at the floor. A woman with a tabby cat in a carrier scooted her chair 2 feet sideways. A teenage boy who'd been on his phone looked up, assessed the dog, and looked back down faster. Mira Langford, who had just come out of the back hallway with a clipboard and a tongue depressor she no longer needed, stopped walking. She'd been working at Caldwell Animal Health Center for 2 years and 3 months. She'd seen German shepherds that could clear a doorframe standing up. She'd seen bull mastiffs that outweighed the men who brought them in. She'd seen working dogs, show dogs, retired police dogs, and once, memorably, a wolf hybrid that a man from Wyoming swore was just a big husky mix. She knew what an aggressive dog looked like. She knew what a trained dog looked like. What she was looking at now was neither one of those things. The Malinois, Bravo, she'd see on the intake form later, was scanning the room, yes. His ears were up, his body coiled, his eyes moving in fast arcs, the way trained dogs do when they're assessing for threat. But there was something beneath all of that, something Mira had learned to recognize the way some people learn to hear a wrong note in a familiar song. The dog was in pain. She could see it in the micro-tension along his left shoulder, the almost imperceptible hitch when he'd come through the door. The way his back right leg was tracking a fraction of an inch off from where it should. She'd seen the exact same presentation 6 weeks ago in a retired search and rescue shepherd named Hooper, who'd been walking into walls because his owners thought he was just getting older and whose spine had been compressing for 8 months without anyone catching it. She started walking toward the front desk, clipboard tucked under her arm, keeping her movement easy and unhurried. The soldier, his name was Grant Ellison, she'd find out in about 45 seconds, noticed immediately. "I said back up," he said, not to the room this time, to her specifically. Mira looked at him without stopping. "I'm the vet tech. This is a veterinary clinic." "He doesn't know that." "He's about to." Ellison's jaw went tight. "Ma'am." He said it the way soldiers say it when they mean the exact opposite of respect. "This animal has completed 2 tours in active deployment zones. He has a bite force of 230 pounds per square inch approximately," Mira said. "I know, same as most Malinois his size. I also know he hasn't put full weight on his right rear hip in the last 30 seconds, and that his left shoulder is compensating, and that whatever's causing that has been going on longer than a few days." She glanced down at Bravo, not at his eyes, at the floor just past his left front paw, then back up at Ellison. "Who did his last checkup?" There was a pause. "Dr. Haas." The name came out automatically, then Ellison seemed to want to take it back. 6 weeks ago. Full physical, clean bill of health. "When did you first notice the gait change?" Another pause, longer. "About 5 weeks ago," Ellison said. Mira didn't say anything. She turned to the front desk, where Paula Greer was watching this exchange with the particular focused attention of someone who has learned to recognize when her colleague is about to do something either very right or very consequential. "Paula, can you pull Bravo's intake file and get exam 3 ready? Page Dr. Aldrich that we have an incoming, not Dr. Haas." Paula was already moving before Mira finished the sentence. Ellison stared at her. "What's wrong with Haas?" "He's in a procedure," Mira said, which was true. She didn't say the other part, that she'd been routing cases away from Dr. Leonard Haas for 11 days, ever since she'd opened the lab results on her phone sitting in her car and spent 20 minutes staring at the screen before she could make herself go back inside. She turned back to Bravo. This was the part that Ellison clearly expected her to skip, expected her to call someone else, to wait, to give the situation a wider berth. She could see it in how he shifted his weight, how his grip on the leash adjusted. She crouched down. Not all the way. She went to a half kneel at an angle, not facing Bravo directly, not making herself small in a way that could read as submissive, not making herself large in a way that could read as challenge. She positioned herself the way you do with an animal that has been trained to interpret human body language as signal. Because to those dogs, everything is signal, and the space between signal and response is where either trust or catastrophe lives. She didn't reach out. She didn't make a sound. She waited. Ellison said, "He's going to." "Shh," Mira said. Ellison's mouth closed. In the waiting room, the woman with the cat held her breath. For 4 seconds, Mira had learned to count them because sometimes 4 seconds was all you got. Nothing happened. Bravo's ears stayed up. His weight stayed forward. His attention split between Mira and his handler in the way trained dogs split it, never fully surrendering one for the other. Then something shifted. It wasn't a single thing. It was the way a room changes when someone opens a window. You feel it before you can identify it, a kind of pressure releasing. Bravo's ears moved, not flat, not aggressive, just easier. His weight settled back onto all 4 legs. The scanning in his eyes slowed. He stepped toward her. Not at her, toward her. There's a difference, and every person in that room felt it even if none of them could have named it. His nose touched her hand. "Oh," the woman with the cat said softly from across the room. Mira let her fingers come up slowly to the side of his jaw, not the top of his head, never the top with a new dog, especially not a working dog, especially not one with nerve damage or chronic pain in his shoulder, and she felt him lean into it. Just slightly. Just enough. "Good," she said, quiet as a held breath. "I see you." Ellison hadn't moved. When Mira finally stood and looked at him, she found something on his face she hadn't expected. Not anger, not the smirk he'd had when she first walked over. Fear. Not of her, of whatever it meant that his dog, his partner, who had never once let a stranger touch him in 4 years of working together, not a handler swap or a kennel attendant or a base veterinarian, had just done exactly that. "He's been different," Ellison said. Not really to her. To the air, the last few weeks. More reactive, more. I thought it was stress. I thought maybe it was the transition period since we got back stateside. "When did you get back?" 8 weeks ago. 8 weeks. 2 weeks before the clean bill of health from Dr. Leonard Haas. "Come on back," Mira said. Exam 3 smelled like antiseptic and the faint ghost of a golden retriever that had been in there an hour before. Paula had the table ready and the intake file out, and she'd found the quiet efficiency to make herself invisible in the corner with a tablet, which Mira appreciated more than she'd ever say out loud. Ellison stood against the wall, his arms crossed. His eyes tracked every movement Mira made with the automatic alertness of someone trained to catalog threat, and she felt it the way you feel a camera. Not unpleasant exactly, but constant. "Fort Bragg?" she asked, going through the intake motions, weight, temperature, preliminary ocular check. "Joint Special Operations out of Fayetteville." A pause. "Before that, 3 deployments. Bravo's been with me since his first one." "How old is he?" 6. She made a note. 6 was middle-aged for a Malinois in active service. Not old, not past it, but the years compounded differently for working dogs than for civilian ones. The stress physiology, the environmental exposures, the physical demands. She had a theory about what those compounding years looked like in Bravo's blood panel, and she'd been sitting on it for 11 days waiting for a moment exactly like this one. She moved to his left shoulder. Bravo tensed, not aggressively, not a growl or a snap, but the tension of an animal bracing for something it has learned to expect. That alone told her most of what she needed to know. She pressed gently along the deltoid. Bravo held still, but his breathing changed. "There," she said. "What is it?" "I don't know yet, but it's been there long enough that he's learned to brace for contact." She kept her hands moving, careful and methodical. "He's not aggressive, Staff Sergeant Ellison. He's in pain." The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. "Staff Sergeant," he said, automatically. Then, a beat later, "He's been cleared twice since we got back. Haas ran full panels both times. Said he was an excellent. I know what Haas said, Mira said. She kept her voice neutral. She'd practiced this in the car after the lab results came in, talking herself through the different versions of this conversation depending on who walked in and what she found. I'm going to recommend we run our own panel today, and I'd like to send a blood draw to an independent lab, not ours. Ellison uncrossed his arms. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. She turned to face him fully. Paula was still in the corner, still watching, still typing something she wasn't actually typing. I'm recommending a second opinion because your dog has a physical presentation that doesn't match a clean bill of health from 6 weeks ago. That's not an implication. That's medical reasoning. He looked at her for a long moment. Fine, he said. Do it. She'd noticed the first discrepancy 14 months ago. It had been small, a dosage notation in a file for a Doberman named Carter that didn't match the treatment notes, a number off by just enough to catch her eye during a routine audit. She'd written it off as a transcription error. Those happened. She flagged it in the internal system and moved on. Then there was the Springer Spaniel, 5 months later, a follow-up for a dog who'd come in limping and gone home, according to the discharge notes, with resolved soft tissue inflammation. The owner brought her back 3 weeks after that, confused and a little angry because Lily was still limping and had been the whole time. Mira had found evidence of a fracture in the x-rays that should have been visible, that had been taken, that appeared nowhere in the official record. She'd gone to Dr. Haas that time. He'd been kind about it. He always was. That was the thing about Leonard Haas. He was unfailingly pleasant, good handshake, laughed at the right moments. He told her the x-ray notation had been misfiled. He was apologetic about the inconvenience. He sent Lily home with a proper splint and a follow-up scheduled for 6 weeks out. 2 months after that, Mira started keeping her own file. Not because she'd decided anything. Not because she was already certain something was wrong. She kept the file the way some people take photographs of things they can't explain, compulsively, hedging against the possibility that the explanation would matter later. She photographed discrepancies on her phone in the parking lot after shifts. She cross-referenced treatment dates against billing codes at home on her laptop. She compiled it all without naming it, because naming it would have made it real, and making it real would have required her to act. She'd sent a blood draw from a Labrador in room 2, another dog she'd had questions about, to her friend Denise at a university veterinary lab 6 weeks ago, slipped in with a batch of research samples Denise occasionally helped her process. The results had come back 11 days ago. Traces of a propranolol compound analog, synthesized, not prescribed. The kind of formulation that interrupted pain signaling for 8 to 10 hours. The kind that would make a dog seem completely fine during a checkup, calm, not reactive, moving without visible distress, while the underlying damage kept accumulating. The kind that was not remotely legal for veterinary administration anywhere in the United States. She'd sent Bravo's sample to Denise 20 minutes ago, while Ellison was filling out updated intake forms at the front desk. She didn't know yet, but she thought she knew. She was in the hallway when Dr. Haas found her. He'd been in a procedure, technically. The procedure had apparently wrapped up early. Langford. His voice had its usual even warmth, the register of a man who had never needed to raise it. I heard we have a JSACOM dog in 3. Yes, she said, Staff Sergeant Ellison's partner. I'm running some additional labs. Haas fell into step beside her, easy, unhurried. I cleared that dog 8 weeks ago and again at 6. He's an excellent. I know what the record says, she said. I'm running additional labs. He stopped walking. She didn't. Mira. The warmth was still there, but it had thinned, the way ice thins when you've been standing on it longer than you should. If there's a concern about protocol, that's something we address internally, not by routing samples to outside. She stopped, turned. How did you know about outside labs? He didn't answer right away, which was its own answer. Denise is a colleague of mine, Mira said. She only knew the sample was from a canine patient at an unspecified clinic. She didn't know it was us. She watched his face. Which means someone else told you. Which means you have someone monitoring what leaves this building. In the 15 months she'd spent building her file, she'd imagined this moment in a dozen different ways. In some versions, she was righteous and fierce. In some, she was shaking. In this one, she was mostly just tired, steady in the way you get when something you've been watching for finally arrives and turns out to be exactly what you expected it to be. The full documentation has already been submitted to the USDA Veterinary Biologics Division, she said. I sent it 9 days ago. A copy went to the Army Veterinary Corps at Fort Sam Houston the day before yesterday. She reached into the pocket of her scrubs and held up her phone. And I have a follow-up call scheduled with a federal investigator at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Haas looked at the phone, then at her face. You don't understand what you've gotten into, he said. I understand what you've done to those dogs, she said. She went back to exam 3. Ellison was standing exactly where she'd left him, but his posture had changed. He'd heard something, voices in the hall, or the particular quality of silence that follows a confrontation. His eyes went to her face immediately. What's going on? Bravo was sitting beside him, pressed against Ellison's left leg. When Mira came through the door, the dog's head turned toward her and stayed there. She sat down on the exam stool and she told him. Not everything at once. She went through it the way she'd learned to give hard news to people who loved their animals, carefully, in order, not jumping ahead to the worst parts before she'd laid the foundation for why they were true. The discrepancies, the pattern, the blood samples, what the compound did to a dog's pain signaling, what it meant for an animal being worked hard in conditions where pain was the difference between bearing weight you could bear and weight that was destroying your joints from the inside out. Ellison didn't move for most of it. When she got to the part about the 2-year pattern of falsified records across 11 military working dogs and nearly 24 civilian patients, he sat down on the bench along the wall, like the information had physical weight. He should have been grounded, he said, not a question. Based on what I'm seeing in his shoulder and hip, yes, probably 6 weeks ago, possibly before. He's been running training rotations. Ellison's voice had gone flat. Obstacle courses, force-on-force drills. He was looking at Bravo, not at her. I thought he was just working through it. He's always been tough. He never showed me. He stopped. He wasn't hiding it from you, Mira said quietly. He was doing what he's trained to do. He just had no way to tell you that what he was trained to do had stopped being something he could do safely. She paused. That's not on you. You had documentation from a licensed veterinarian stating he was medically cleared. You had no reason. I had a reason, Ellison said. I had 5 weeks of watching my dog favor his right side, and I told myself it wasn't what I thought it was because the paperwork said it wasn't. His jaw tightened. That's on me. Bravo got up from beside his handler's leg. He padded across the 3 feet of linoleum between them, put his head in Mira's lap. She heard Ellison's breath catch. He's never done that, Ellison said, not with anyone. Mira's hand moved to the back of Bravo's neck. She could feel the muscle tension there, the deep knots that spoke of months of overcompensation, of a body quietly rerouting around an injury while the work kept coming. She thought about all the training rotations, all the drills, all the days this dog had shown up and performed, because performing was the only language he had for being with the person he trusted most. He knew, she said. I think he's been waiting for someone to finally notice. The federal investigators arrived at 3:47 p.m., 13 minutes before her scheduled call. Paula had apparently contacted them directly sometime during the afternoon. Mira found out later that Paula Greer had been keeping her own notes for the past 8 months. That Paula had actually been the one who'd flagged the billing irregularities to a legal contact before Mira had known anything was wrong, and that their parallel investigations had been running simultaneously in the same building without either of them knowing. When that became clear, they looked at each other across exam 3 and then both started laughing in the way you laugh when there's genuinely no other adequate response. Dr. Haas was escorted from the building at 4:22 p.m. Terrence Finch, the clinic's office manager who'd been processing the fraudulent billing submissions, was already on the phone with an attorney by the time the second vehicle arrived. 3 pharmaceutical company representatives, employees of a compound synthesis operation working out of licensed research space in Raleigh, would be named in the subsequent federal indictment. The experimental analog had been administered to 43 animals across 5 veterinary practices in a 4-state region, 3 of them military working dogs. Haas had received just over $40,000 over 18 months in exchange for animal access and records clean enough to prevent detection. Mira sat on the back steps of the clinic at 6:15 p.m. and drank a cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago. She thought about Lily, the Springer Spaniel, who'd come in limping and been sent home and brought back again. She thought about how close she'd come 14 months ago to writing off a number in a file as a transcription error and moving on with her day. She thought about how sometimes the only thing standing between a wrong and a reckoning is someone who keeps watching when watching is easier to stop. The door opened behind her. Ellison came out and sat on the step beside her. Not close. There was enough space between them for a person to be independent, but not so much that the proximity meant nothing. Bravo's imaging came back, he said. Soft tissue involvement in the hip flexor, stress response in the lumbar joint. Dr. Aldrich said with proper treatment, 6 to 8 weeks, he should make a full recovery. He paused. Should. He will, Mira said. You sound sure. I am. He was quiet for a moment. The parking lot in front of them was mostly clear. The second vehicle had gone. Someone from the Army Veterinary Corps had come and left in a hurry, and the steady procedural noise of the afternoon was settling into something resembling an ordinary evening. When I came in today, Ellison said, I told you he'd attack. I remember. I said, don't touch him. I remember that too. He didn't say anything else for a beat. She waited. I was wrong, he said, simply, without qualifier or cushion. Mira took a sip of cold coffee. You were trying to protect him. I was trying to make it easier on everyone by eliminating the possibility of a problem, he said. That's different from protecting him. I know the difference. A pause. I should have listened to what I was seeing in him for 5 weeks. I should have pushed back harder on the clean paperwork instead of being relieved by it. I should have trusted something other than the official version. She looked at him sideways. The official version is hard to argue with when the man writing it has a license and a handshake and 20 years of community goodwill behind him. Yeah, he was staring at the parking lot at nothing in particular. It is, until it isn't. Bravo was inside, resting on the padded mat in the recovery area under Paula's careful watch. He would go back to Ellison once the treatment plan was properly established, once the physical therapy protocol was set, once there was a real medical record in place, one that said true things about what was actually happening inside his body. But he was there now. He was safe. Someone had finally paid attention to what he'd been trying to say. Thank you, Ellison said. Mira set down the cold coffee. I'm a vet tech. It's what I do. He looked at her then. Not with the assessing, threat-cataloging attention from that morning, but with something quieter behind it. No, he said, it's more than that. She didn't argue with him, because he wasn't wrong. Down the hall, somewhere in the building behind them, Bravo had lifted his head from the padded mat and turned it toward the door, the way dogs do when they're tracking someone they have already decided to trust. Paula would tell Mira about it later, how he'd turned and simply waited, patient and unhurried, until the sound of footsteps on the back steps confirmed what he had already known. She was still there. She hadn't gone anywhere. He put his head back down, closed his eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, he rested.